Well, the admission criteria is the same across the board for any student. So it's not, so we're recruiting young squash players from around the world. We've actually, in our program, we've actually got students from 12 different countries right now. It's about 50% American, but we have them from all over the world. The criteria for the admissions office is the same, and I can say with confidence that this is the same across the Ivy League. It's not that every Ivy League admissions criteria will be identical, but if you take, for example, if you took Harvard, Princeton, Yale, their criteria for getting in would be pretty much the same. So the university is recruiting the whole person. So obviously we find a kid with a good squash player, but there's an academic bar. So when we're recruiting, we go through this process all the time. I literally am going through kids' transcripts with my assistant coach almost on a daily basis, but definitely every week. If the student doesn't meet the academic requirements for this institution, then we can't proceed, and we don't proceed. So the high school transcript is the most important. But then, of course, we have testing, the SAT or the ACT. There's got to be a reasonable score. The student is going to be interviewed. Sometimes they get interviewed twice. The interview is to find out a little bit more about the individual and for the admissions office to get a sense of what this student will be like in the classroom and in the dorms. Are they open? Are they curious? Are they interested? Are they genuine and authentic about what they want to study? So the recruiting process is about recruiting the whole person. There is no one thing that is going to get a student through the door if they're not meeting the requirements by the admissions office in other areas. Well, again, because it's a range and because it's the whole person, you can't actually come out with an absolute score. So if you had, let's say you had an international student where English was a second language, and the transcript was very strong, but there was a couple of hiccups, say, in their junior year, the admissions office might look at the test scoring and say, well, we would like to see, we know that this is a smart kid, but we would like to see them prove it because they didn't prove it in the last year. And there might be mitigating circumstances. Did the student change schools? Did mom and dad get divorced? Was there an illness in the family? So you cannot come up with a definitive number. Do I think that because the testing, the American students grow up and they understand the testing? Do I think that there is probably an understanding? If English is a second language, might the admissions office look at English as a second language and say, okay, well, they didn't score, they didn't get 750, whatever the score they're looking at, they didn't get these high scores. They didn't get a 700. Sorry. Might they allow them? But again, we don't get into what goes on in the admissions office because there's so much going on in their domain that we're actually not aware of. We see the transcript, we meet the kids, we talk to them. We know the criteria for our squash program. And our squash program is not just about recruiting the best kids that we can. I would say every year that we will pass on recruiting a very strong squash player for someone slightly weaker because they are a better fit, or they're more mature, or they're more coachable. There's something about their character. So that's not the admissions criteria, that's our criteria. The biggest, I can tell you this, which is an interesting one, is our sport and all varsity sports used to have a defined season. And they, in my opinion, they should still, but times have changed. And so what is the biggest reason we don't recruit a kid? And the biggest reason is burnout. We do not recruit any student athlete that we believe, that we sense through observation or anecdotal or through the coach, that this kid is burning out. We have just had one student drop out of our program 2 months ago for this very reason. They're just starting the second year and they're burnt out. And this student's sibling, 2 years older, dropped out of a program at another Ivy school in their first year. So when a student drops out, it's quite impactful into the program, and it's of concern with the athletic directors and the admissions office. And you have meetings about this as an inquiry. So I know I've gone off on a tangent here, but it's important to understand the character component from the coach's perspective in the program. If we've got a program of 26 to 30 student athletes and we work with them 5 to 6 days a week for 4 years, they better be students of good character. They better be nice people. They better be coachable. They need to be a fit with the program, with the culture in the program. They better be contributing to the program. So these are all aspects of character, maturity, and passion. So right now, we have 11 recruiting slots for both men and women over the 4 years. But it's not carved in stone. It can change. It can change. And it'll change for different reasons that is probably not the right time for me to go in here. Mm-hmm. The Ivy schools, just because obviously I know the Ivy's more than others, they may have different quotas from school to school. So I can think of 2 Ivy schools that have many more recruiting slots than Harvard does. Okay. And I know of 1 that has less. And there are other schools that may have more. So it's, I don't think it's not really an important question. There are many, many good schools, and we're fully aware of the obsession with the kids and the families, the obsession with Harvard, Princeton, Yale. We know that obsession is there. It's hard to really understand from our perspective because we know how brilliant. There are so many great schools in the United States, so many great schools in Canada and indeed around the world. But it just is what it is. It's the brand. We know that the brand is a big brand. Okay, so there is no advantage. Okay, there is. I cannot tell you, some of the stuff that's been written, I can't know exactly what goes on in the admissions office, but dear Malcolm Gladwell, who just wrote Tipping Point, and obviously he's not a fan of Harvard. It's not for me to rebut some of the claims that he made in there, but I personally have never experienced anything that he's alluding to. I've never seen it. I've never witnessed it. And he is very interesting, but book that every parent read called Outliers. It's hard to find a coach that could agree with anything that was written there. But the thought that there's an advantage or a disadvantage from our perspective as coaches recruiting for this institution, I can tell you right now, there are no quotas. We have no restrictions. Our job is to recruit the best student athletes we can that are a fit with our program, that meet the admissions criteria. But we coaches, we don't decide whether the student gets in. It's the admissions office. And the kid is interviewed. And there are recommendation letters. And there's a lot of inquiry that goes on. And there are no quotas. So first of all, we do write letters to support other students. But I do not write a letter for a student if I don't know them, because it's an empty letter. I would never do that. It would be unethical. So if I have known a student, say, for 4, 5, 6 years, and I know them to be a really good character, and they've come to camps or they've been in the junior program here or whatever, but I've got to know them and I've got something to say about that student, then I will write a letter. But I will not write a letter. I will not write a letter for someone who I do not know. Now, could a coach write a letter, another coach, to support? So if there's a coach that I know, could they write a letter to me and I would forward the letter because the coach is of good character and they've had a lot of good kids come out of the program? I could forward something like that, but I would always put the disclaimer on it that I don't know the student personally, but I know the coach personally, as an example. The support letter, if the coach writes a support letter, it does not carry a lot of weight, but it does get read. It does get read. So anything that the coach is submitting, and of course, the coach in the letter would, if it's a good or a passionate squash player, the coach would say in the letter, if this student were to be admitted to Harvard, we would welcome that student athlete to try out for the team. And if they were successful in the tryout, we would welcome them into the program, as an example, or something like that. This is just so false. It's so false. I cannot tell you how wrong this is. I don't know where these rumors start. And I know they're not just about Harvard. We hear about these things all the time. We hear things about us as coaches, Ivy League coaches, college coaches. This stuff is completely and utterly false. So we have recruited a good number of Canadians into our program. Some of them have been national champions. What has happened, I've been here for 14 years. What has happened over my time is that, so Canada used to be much, much stronger than America. So it was normal for us to recruit more from north of the border. Well, the Americans caught up to the Canadians and then they passed them. So somebody might look at the stats coming on right now and who's getting recruited, might say, oh, well, only the number 1s and 2s in Canada are getting recruited. But it's only to do with level. It's only to do with level. That is why you are less likely to see, for example, if you've got the number 1 or 2 ranked player in Egypt, it's not that that kid's not recruitable. It's just that maybe that student has focused so much on squash and they haven't focused enough on their academics. So many of the when we get an Egyptian into the program, we've got 2 Egyptians in the program right now, 1 on each team. And when we recruit an Egyptian, they're usually not the number 1 or 2 ranked player in their country for that very reason. So when we think of an Ali Farag as an example, when we recruited Ali was a brilliant student. Okay. So he's an exception that doesn't disprove the rule. The recruiting starts, we're allowed to contact the kid after September the 1st of the junior year. We are obviously, so if we go to the World Championships, which we will do in the summer, we're actually, most of the recruiting is done because most of the kids are in the under 19s. So we like to go to the tournaments, the US Junior Open, yes, the US Nationals. I used to always go personally to the Canadian Junior Open. We no longer do that. We go to the British Junior Open. And we're looking at the under 17s and the under 15s, not looking at the under 19s. Most kids contact us, but we have our list and we do contact them. But we cannot have communication before September the 1st of their junior year. And that's when it starts. It's a very long, I think sometimes overly complicated trek to go. Our international students usually are not familiar with the testing. So there are some schools which are testing optional. We became testing optional only for a very short period, a handful of years after COVID, but we're no longer. Whether that goes back to testing optional is not for me to say. But right now, testing is not an option. So when our internationals who are not familiar with the SAT and the ACT, it's a longer process and it's a tougher process for us. It's a riskier process for us, but we understand it's stressful for us, the coach, yes, but the main stress, of course, is always on the student. And we here, I think our recruiting at Harvard is exemplary. We are very considerate of the student, and Luke Hammond, who coordinates it, we are always helping. We often help students after we have told them that we won't recruit them. We introduce them to other colleges. We help them consider certain things. We do mock interviews for our students to help them, not for getting into Harvard, but for helping them because there might be something that they were lacking that we weren't recruiting them for. We try and help our students, and all the time we tell them, please have a big safety net. We are very nervous when we talk to the students that are only focused on one school or 3 schools, Harvard, Princeton, Yale, for example. If a student is only focused on us, if it's an international student only focused on us, and if they don't get into Harvard, they're going to go to a school in their own country, fair enough. But not if someone is looking to come to America, or it's an American student and they've only got 1, 2, 3 schools on the list. That does not make sense, and we advise them accordingly. So the mental skill development for players is the most important. There are many parents out there that when they observe their kids struggling, they think that that the kid's an outlier and it's only affecting them. Well, it's absolutely not true. It affects everyone. So it affected Ali Farag. And in fact, if you ever get the chance to hear Ali talk about his mental training, and he wasn't interested when he first came to Harvard, and it was after 3 losses that he actually decided to do mental training. So the mental training, it's a skill that you develop and learn. Some kids learn it more quickly than others, but I can't answer the question, how can mental training skills be learned? or taught, it's the biggest subject of the law. It's a lot of repetition. It's got certain components. So everyone's heard of visualization. So yes, visualization is a component, but scripting how they want to play, using words and phrases, trigger words and phrases, playing with the alter ego effect, play like or be like someone, looking at habitual catches, mental and tactical, watching top players, emulating people sometimes outside of your sport and getting a sense of that. And understanding that we're immersing, and they are immersing themselves in a stressful environment, and that this is part of the challenge. So at all the time, we're trying to change how the athlete is viewing the challenge. Now, one thing that we all know is this, and this is what mental training is about. If you take a young athlete and they're on the court with their coach or someone better than them, and definitely if they're older than they are, that athlete will always be relaxed. We call it arrow up. Now, if the gap is too big, they won't be relaxed. But if the gap, the person is better, older and better. So when you see kids playing tournaments and they are playing in the category above, so they're good enough to do that, they will play their best squash. They will perform absolutely fantastic. What happens is the parent and some less experienced coaches look at the potential of that athlete and they say, oh, this is the level of this kid. But that is not the level of that kid. The level of that kid is where they are technically and tactically and under mental stress. And the mental stress is only there when they play someone at their level or when they're slightly below their level. So when they play someone, we call it arrow down. So they're challenging someone who's below them. When they're playing someone older, better, we call it arrow up. An arrow up match, they're more relaxed, they move better, they think better, they enjoy it, they play better. They look like a different player. You put them on the court with someone just below their level, or someone around their level, or someone they don't like losing to, and we see stress. And that is the measure of where their level is. When they're arrow up, we may see a glimpse of potential. We may say, you've got the potential to be very good, but not until if we actually address the mental side. The mental side is a drip, drip, drip. It's little and often, and it has to be done carefully. And so I'll finish with just this statement. I tell my guys that we are going to immerse you in stress, but we call it stress with answers. We call it guided stress. And the way we do it here is every week they play a challenge match against the other members on the team. So there's a ladder. We all know what a ladder is. If they play the person above them, they are arrow up. And I educate them on what it's like to be arrow up. And they all know what this is like. The mental training doesn't really address arrow up unless the gap is big. But that's a conversation for another day. So the mental training is about how to find a space in their head, which is to do with how they feel. It's to do with how they feel to deal with arrow down situations. So the challenge match on the ladder here at Harvard is not just to organize the team, so we've got them in the right order. It is to rehearse the mental program. So every week we do a mental program. I leave stuff on my whiteboard. Tonight, we play Trinity College, the toughest program in college squash historically. We will do a mental program this lunchtime. It doesn't take long. The mental program today will be about 12, maybe 15 minutes. And they will do all the things that I spoke about earlier. They will be very clear. On Sunday, we play Yale. We will do another mental program tomorrow, but they are familiar. They have their mental training books. Everybody brings their books. There's nothing in a computer or a phone. It's a drip, drip, drip. And then we reflect. So today, in today's mental program, we will look back to the Ivy scrimmage, which was in the first weekend in November. And I will say to them, reflect back to November. Where are you today as a young woman, as a young man? Where are you with your maturity as a person and an athlete? And they start to look back, because recognition of growth accelerates growth. And then from there, we will do an anchor script. The anchor script is to bring perspective, to step back from the stress and to feel different inside, to feel calmer and clearer. And then we will do a mental program.